Okay, next up we're going to welcome Angela Hills, EVP and Managing Director of Pinstripe Ochre House, to the stage. She's going to talk about some interesting research findings they have on talent models. Angela?
Thank you. Probably have to earn the applause before I get it, but it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and I do lead our North American operations for Pinstripe Ochre House. Some of you may be aware, but about, I think, July of last year, we joined forces with Ochre House to create a more global footprint. We will be announcing some new things related to our brand identity next week, so keep your ear to the ground on that. And part of what we're going to be sharing is actually the research that I'm going to give you guys a preview on today. So as part of that, we actually did conduct some research around what's going on between talent and workforce, as well as how to link that to business outcomes, ironically, as this seems to be a theme for a lot of what we're talking about today. So we will be launching this all and sharing this full report next week with the market. Any of you as participants here today that are getting a bit of a preview, if you'd like to have a copy of the report in your inbox next week, find me or one of my colleagues from Pinstripe and Ochre House. Go ahead, raise your hands, table number 5, drop a card, and we'd be happy to send you a copy of the report. It will be available on our website as well, so if you like to get it yourself or find it your own way, you're welcome to do that. And today, what I'll be doing is just, again, sharing sort of some of the high-level previews to it. As we look at kind of the details, as I mentioned a bit ago, the goal that we had for this study was to really definitively look to see if we could make a link between workforce practices and business results. Guess what? We found some. There were some tight correlations that were exciting to see. We looked at probably about 30 different items and attributes, and there were 8 things that came out loud and clear to correlate more directly to high performance than other elements. So I'm going to share with you today what those 8 things were that did have high correlation. And if we have time, we can talk a little bit about some of the things that were surprising but a little less relevant. And just for those of you who kind of like to know, details around studies, the report itself will have a lot of the actual demographics, but we did speak to about and got data from about 750 respondents. There was representation in North America, Western Europe, the Middle East, and in all 6 of the different industries that we kind of focus on and serve, which include healthcare, life sciences, engineering, technology, consumer brands, and financial services. So it was a pretty good representative group and some really valid, data set that we were able to work with here. The full report will actually have industry segmentation kind of pull out on some of the data as well, but I'm not going to be going into that level of detail today. As I mentioned, I'll start with the end. We'll start with a conclusion. Organizations that were intentional and focused on their workforce strategies and approaches were actually higher performing. So this is great, and many of us who often need to have data that we can pull to make business cases for things that we're trying to accomplish, it's great to have another thing to reference. And we'll jump now into sort of what those 8 things were that we saw were most correlated. These are in order of how highly correlated they were to high performance. So we've got 8. The first one that was most highly correlated was actually related to work-life balance. So the organizations that most highly aligned with performance were far more likely to have strategies around how to manage their workforce balance. This included flexibility, included virtual and remote workforce abilities. It included convenience factors and things like having your dry cleaner on site and all of that. But there was definitely a strong correlation in workforce and work-life balance. The next 3 that I'm going to share actually all relate to data. And interestingly enough, Ananda, where are you? You're going to probably see some things here that maybe make you feel good, and some of the rest of you who I know are working heavily on data. The high-performing organizations were 12 times more likely than underperforming organizations to use data and analytics in their workforce practices. 12 times more likely. They had a very, very strong focus on tying it to their business objectives and to really digging into different ways to tackle data. They were also much more likely to use sophisticated quantitative analytics to measure quality of their workforce. This one was a 9 times more likely factor. when it came to high performance versus underperforming organizations. And there was still a significant difference between high performing and intermediate or average performing organizations. So these organizations had very unique ways to track and identify what quality of talent looked like, how they would identify which of their employees were high quality, as well as candidates. And the third thing that was related to data is actually in terms of being able to articulate the actual ROI, in a sense, or the link to business impact in a quantitative way. So organizations that were high performing, I think it was about 66% of high performing organizations identified that they were very good at quantifying the business impact of their talent practices and their workforce, whereas only 15% of underperforming organizations were there, so it was a 4-to-1. We also dug into the level of sophistication in this, and high-performing organizations were 8 times more likely than underperforming to have, more rigorous and sophisticated measures in place, whereas those that were underperforming were most likely to identify that they really had no way to track this at all, and they didn't really focus on it at all. So lots around data. All right. So the next thing that actually came up was really interesting, and workforce segmentation. How many of you do some form of workforce segmentation in your organizations today? Whether it be around tenure or pay grade or level of organizational role, function. Anybody? Still waking up today? We're still kind of tying in. So a couple of you do. We found that high-performing organizations were significantly more likely to do some level of workforce segmentation. And it related to all of the sort of the kinds of things that I mentioned a bit ago. In addition, one of the things that we're seeing heavily trending is looking at business critical versus business as usual kind of roles, and looking for a variety of different ways to identify different ways to categorize employees, and then the use of different unique practices to customize the HR and workforce practices to align to the needs of those employees and to align to the priorities of the business based on those different employees. So again, significant difference between how organizations focused on workforce segmentation. We're jumping through these fast so we can get some discussion going, so be prepared and start thinking about questions. We also noticed, and this is one that I know was a big focus with the MGM presentation yesterday and some of the examples there, but there was a significant difference, again, between the focus on diversity. So 95% of high performers had very effective diversity strategies and created an environment where people with diverse and different cultural backgrounds and focus were able to view success and see ways that they could apply different work styles to their work environment. This is one, interestingly, and it came in at about 6 as opposed to one of the higher correlated items, because even average and underperformers did identify it as important, but we still saw a huge correlation of much higher effectiveness in this arena for the high-performing organizations. Number 7 came in with generations. So this is interesting because it's been a topic for I don't know how long now, right? We all often hear about the importance of different generational focus. And while it might be something that feels like a little bit old news to many of us in this room, we did see a differentiation between organizations that are high performing and not, in relation to both how they identified their ability to meet the unique needs of folks in different generations, as well as the practices that they had that tied to it. So while it might seem like something that we've talked about for a long time, many haven't yet figured out the magic to how to really ensure that folks in all generations have the ability to bring their best to work every day. And the final thing that we identified was related to the employee value proposition. So high-performing, overperforming organizations most definitely understood what their employee value proposition was. They were clear on how they had a different and unique message compared to competition and the relative markets that they were in, and they leveraged it significantly in order to align and retain the talent that they had, as well as attract new talent to their organizations. So this was another area that we saw kind of high focus on. Any surprises? there's some good stuff in here. There's one that's not here in particular, though, that some of you might have expected. Any guesses? Any thoughts? Anything on here that you would have expected to see that didn't come up? Compensation. Another one is technology. So we actually saw no difference between both the reported use of different technology tools as well as the effectiveness of the use of technology tools between high, average, and low-performing organizations. So the question becomes, when we look at correlation versus causal and all of that, how much of that is it's a ticket to admission, or is it something that really doesn't differentiate whether we've got high performance? I don't know if we got a lot on the comp data with regards to this one, but we will, that'll be in the full report next week. So one of the other key things that we identified here is that with regards to high performance, in addition to having all of these things as differentiators, those organizations that were strong in their HR practices were significantly higher in terms of their success outlook for the future. So those organizations that were strong in these 8 categories were significantly more likely to look forward and say, 3 years from now, we expect to have success in our business and we see a positive outlook in our future. So we did look at both historical as well as prediction and expectation of future results. So that is the high level of our study. We have about 3 or 4 minutes for additional questions if anyone has any. I'd be happy to take them. Yeah. In terms of the development, employee development, a bit. So with regards to just the overall, I mean, a lot of that tied into the segmentation element of things in terms of really looking at how are we meeting the needs of unique different categories of employees. So there was a bit of that, but again, it'll be in the full report. Yeah, Bridie. Hi.
This shows a lot of correlation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any work in terms of causation?
So there's not full causation. This is more of a correlative report and study. The one thing that we did, though, to make the tie between performance one step tighter and one step closer was we actually didn't just look for self-report on how much you focus on talent and how much you focus on this, but we actually had people and respondents identify their top business priorities and then where they were toward achieving those top priorities so that we had a more tight validity around actual performance from a business perspective. And then we looked for the correlation between that and the items related to workforce. So instead of just being able to say, do you think you do a great job on workforce? Do you think you're a great and successful business? We wanted to get a little bit tighter in terms of really looking at alignment to business results. But it is more on the correlation side than the causal. Yeah. Questions? Another? Are there any other questions? All right. Well, again, we will be happy to provide you the report. Either drop an email or business card our way, or take a look at our website next week as we have other new exciting information to share. Thank you very much.